If you're currently looking at your plant and going, is something going on or is it just me? This video is for you. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So we are now in kind of like the middle of February, and for a lot of people in the Northern Hemisphere, this is the time where winter is starting to wind down and we start heading towards spring. And this might be also the time that you're sitting there looking at your plants going, am I imagining it? Or is something going on with my plant at the moment? Is it slowly starting to wake up? This video is definitely for you. I want to talk about my top 5 more subtle hints that the plants are giving you that they're getting ready to kind of reactivate, essentially, kind of coming out of that slower, more dormant time of the year in terms of winter and starting to head towards their growing season. And yes, I hear all of us rejoicing in the back going, finally, we get some growth in our plants. But without further ado, let's dive into my first subtle hint. So the first thing that you're going to be looking at is actually the node itself starting to swell up a bit more, starting to be less than just flat, but maybe starting to get some action. So in front of me, I've got my Studinera kerrii. For people that were wondering how it's doing, I am now officially on 4 leaves from 2 different growth points, and there are more growth points. So let's start off by seeing what this might look like. So can you see right there, and I'll try to move the little label out the way, you can see that there's a growth point there. This area here is where the new growth point is going to come out, and it's starting to swell up. Obviously, there's a little bit of a growth point pointing out on this one. On your plant, there might not even be a growth point yet, but you might start seeing the nodes, whether or not it's on a philodendron, an anthurium, and not just in aroids, you can see this in other plants as well, other house plants. Even if you're looking at your begonias, for example, you might start seeing the nodes starting to swell up. In this case, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to show you this plant, you might also be able to see, because this has got more of a crawling habit, I'm starting to see it crawl a bit more. And these little areas here are starting to swell up as well. And there's another little section there. This is usually a good indication. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything is going to happen just yet, but it's giving you an early and subtle signal that, you know what, things are changing. Things are starting to happen a bit more because, as I said, it is kind of prepping itself. It's getting ready to start bursting into life again, especially for something that might have not been doing too much in terms of activity in the recent few weeks or even months. But let me reiterate this, especially if you're just starting off with plants now. The people that have been doing this for a while, they kind of know roughly what this season tends to look like a bit more. But at this stage, you're not expecting it to immediately start going into growth. Like if we were in spring and summer right now, you'd be going, oh yes, the node is like swelling up, I'm about to get a new leaf. You probably are. You're probably going to see some growth, but it might not be as quickly as you would have been seeing that happening in spring and summer. But it is getting ready. At this stage, especially with this kind of subtle clue or subtle hint, there isn't very much that you really should be doing. This is just a more of a sit back and observe and have a look and see what your plant is doing and what it's trying to achieve. So this is a great stage for you to just kind of look and go, oh, I'm clocking that. Something's about to happen. So exciting times are about to unfold. My second big hint or kind of subtle clue is going to be the fact that there's going to be some pot pressure and also some root development that you should start seeing very, very shortly, basically. So, for instance, and this is a good example because this is an anthurium that is almost pretty much fully dormant at the moment. For anybody asking, this is the forgetii. There was a new leaf on this one. I was very excited for the new leaf, but the slug got to it. One tiny singular leaf. slug got to it. I laugh because there's nothing else to do. But this is a good example of a plant that on the face of it looks fully dormant, that there's issues, there's all of these things, but one thing that you need to start maybe looking at a bit more in detail is to start taking out some of your plants from their pots, basically. And obviously your plant might be looking a lot better than this plant does. It'll probably have some leaves, but I thought I'd use an extreme example. And the first thing you might be able to notice is maybe some roots at the very top that maybe weren't there before, or more of them, so kind of more surface roots. But then, and this is where your clear pots will really come in handy, you might start seeing some roots that are appearing on the plants, in the soil of the plant basically, or whatever media you are using. And this is usually a good indication that things are starting to wake up, things are starting to happen. We've talked about this on this channel a lot before, that even in the winter you get a lot of plants that will have root growth. Makes sense? Even in the winter, that is a lot of the time when the plants will be focusing a bit more on what's happening underneath the soil rather than what's on top of the soil. If and when that starts becoming a lot more intense, it's giving you a really quick indication that, you know what, I'm getting ready, I'm getting more and more roots in here. To be clear at this stage, if you are seeing roots through your clear pot, or even if roots are coming out the bottom, this is not the time for you to be repotting. Let the plant settle. Things haven't started happening on the top just yet. And if you repot now, you might cause more issues than it's necessary. So I've picked up another anthurium, so you might be able to see this a bit more clearly. So hopefully you should be able to see some roots that are happening on there, and some people might be going, oh, this is now the time that I need to be repotting this. It's getting more and more roots. If I leave this to go for a bit longer, I'm going to have issues because it's going to be root bound too much. Step back from the plant and step back from the repot material. As I said, this might be happening, but there's not a lot more leaves that are happening at the top. So let it be for a second, because it is preparing to push the new growth out that's going to come out in spring and summer. But if you do this too quickly and give it too much root mass, or not root mass, but more soil around its root mass, it's going to stay wetter for longer. It still can't utilize that much extra water because the foliage hasn't started bursting yet. So again, this is one of the moments where it's good to just observe, clock it, and just go, oh, okay, that is good to know that this is now starting to get ready. Even if you're not seeing any swelling, like we were talking about before, in the top of the node, you might start seeing a lot more happening in the roots. And again, for the people that don't have the clear pots, because I understand that not everybody will have any form of clear pot, obviously this is just like a clear plastic cup, you might start seeing roots coming out the bottom for the first time. One last little thing on this is, this might also be, you might not notice the roots, especially if you don't have the clear pots, but you might notice that all of a sudden, if you know that this plant, you're roughly watering it like once every 2 weeks in the winter, and it was more than enough, and it was just getting dry enough that it needed to be rewatered, you might be starting to see this plant, ooh, it's been the kind of usual 2 weeks where I would check before I water, and it's a lot drier than it needs to be basically at this point, or than it used to be at this point. Like, what's happening? It's usually a good indication, even if you can't see the roots, that there's a lot more happening down here and it's getting ready. So at that point, obviously, if you're watering it, or if you're checking it before you water it every 2 weeks, maybe shift it to every 10 days, every 12 days, and start adjusting that way. Because in this situation, again, you don't want to be flooding it with water. You don't want it to be sapping wet for a long period of time, which might be okay in the warmer summery months or even spring months, but not in the winter. But you do want to start adjusting in order to give it the best chance of success. And on to the third kind of subtle hint that the plants are going to be giving you at this time of the year. You're looking at how turgid a leaf might be, and also the leaf texture. So let me give you an example. Obviously this plant has been this way for a while now because I kind of propagated it from a stem without even any roots and just put it straight into soil. So for the people that might not know, this is a propagation of a Syngonium chiapense. Spell love. the texture. This is so great. But if you look at this, this might have been a good example if this plant was kind of still not actively growing. You can kind of see that there's maybe some curling going on here. You might see, and this is obviously very much getting ready at this point of the year, but this might be a bit floppier. You might not see it being quite so turgid and upright. But looking at this plant where the leaves have really started to pick up and the petioles have become a lot stiffer, and obviously this one's also got a new growth point that's coming in there, that is kind of showing me, you know what, things are happening. Things are happening. It's probably a combination of there's maybe going to be a node that is going to be swelling. Obviously this one does have a node that's already activating, but maybe there's a node that's swelling. I can already see that there's a lot of roots that are happening right down at the bottom. And I can also see that hint that, you know what, things are looking very perky, very perky. So this is a plant that is getting ready for that kind of spring and summertime to start settling in and just going, oh, I'm getting ready. It's like kind of on your marks, get set, go. But this is the get set, go. The on your marks would have been kind of more just maybe the node kind of starting to swell up. But at this point, it's the get set stage. So it's like, we're starting to utilize more water. We're starting to dry out a bit faster. We're getting more roots. We're getting leaves that are a much better texture. They're not kind of limp. They're not kind of floppy. It's getting ready to burst into action very soon. And I had to put it down because it was getting a bit heavy. But this is not the point where you're going to be focusing on the shine of the leaves. And I specifically picked up the chia pens because it's more of a matte textured leaf anyway. It's got that rubbery kind of feel to it. It will never be massively shiny. It can get a bit of a shine, but it's not a leathery type leaf which is always going to be shiny. That's not what you're going to be looking at here. You're going to be looking at the stiffness and the kind of turgidness, that's so bad that word, of your leaf to show that that is kind of starting to activate a bit more. Because essentially what it's doing is there's going to be, if this is the petiole of the leaf and this is the leaf, there's more water that's coming into that petiole and into that leaf, and it's making it stiffer in order to start being able to utilize and a bit more move towards the light, because it can see what's about to happen. And by see what's about to happen, the plants can kind of read signals of their environment around them. They are very good at understanding, the same way that in the winter, when the days start getting shorter and the temperatures start dropping, they start to realize, you know what, this is a time when we need to start slowing down. As spring is starting to come into play soon, they're noticing that the days are getting longer. February is this month, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, and I live in the UK, so it's even more noticeable here, is that the days are starting to get longer fast in February. And by March, you're starting to look at longer days anyway. And the temperatures are starting to creep up. Not quite yet in the UK, but they are starting to change. And that is a good point that I was going to make here. Is obviously things might be happening at different stages in different locations of the world, especially if you, again, I'm talking about the Northern Hemisphere now that's coming out of winter and going into spring. Flip side of this, if anybody's watching from the Southern Hemisphere and they're watching this at their winter to spring transition, this would apply the same thing. Not everybody's going to have the same kind of results at the same time. It just depends on where you are and what's happening in your environment. The fourth kind of clue or subtle hint is going to be the older leaves starting to reposition themselves in preparation for those brighter, longer days. And you might notice this, and this is a Rhaphidophora corthalii, I think. I'll put the name at the top. I can't remember now off the top, and I, for some reason, lost my label on this one, annoyingly. But this one's doing really well for the people that have been wondering. This is more of a shingling plant, and it's attached quite nicely to the moss pole. Now, you might have not have seen this before, and you can see some of these leaves are kind of lifting. You can see some of the older ones are a bit more flat towards the moss pole, but you can see some of these older leaves are starting to lift off. And that is because they are noticing, the light is starting to come back. The light, I'm getting more light for more hours. Let's start repositioning some of these older leaves in order to best kind of capture that light. And you can know this as well, that if you're looking at this in spring and summer, this is the point of the year with a lot of the times It's faster than it would be any other time of the year, and I'm not talking about the usual kind of leaf movement that you might get from prayer plants, which is quite fast and quite drastic throughout the singular day. But with a lot of plants in the spring and summer, you'll notice that their movement of the leaves happens a lot more drastically over a few days or even weeks because they are repositioning for that light. It's starting to happen already with a lot of the plants, at least in my collection. It might be for yours, and again, I will caveat it like I just said in the previous section. It depends on where you are and your conditions to see how things are going to be going. I can see that there are roots, obviously, that are happening on here again, and just kind of giving, that's a new leaf that's already kind of unfurled there. So there's a lot of things that are happening. The leaves are looking a lot more turgid. This was a bit softer a few kind of even weeks ago, and it's starting to reactivate. So that is a really good indication that, you know what, the plant is paying attention. And this might be something that if you've only just maybe quickly noticed this on its own, you might just be going, oh, okay, that's not particularly exciting. It's just maybe moving towards the light. But start looking at other hints like we were talking about before. Look at the roots. Look at what's happening. Are the nodes starting to swell up? All of these things. Are the leaves a lot more turgid? These are all in combination kind of going, oh, something exciting is about to happen with this plant because it's starting to realize that spring is just around the corner. And the fifth and kind of final one that at least I'm going to talk about in this video, kind of subtle hint or kind of growth, something to notice about its growth, is the increase in thirst of a plant without necessarily active growth. And I'll show you this again. This is the Columnea sanguinei. The people were that saw me recently kind of unbox like a good few months ago now. It's still doing particularly well. You can see some of the roots are coming out at the bottom. You can't see the roots probably as well on this plant because they are very fine hair-like roots. But it's growing upright. I am giving it some support with the jankiest of support sticks. Yes, yes. But this is business in the front, party in the back. And I know what some people said this looks like as well. I hear you. I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah. It is one of those things, and you can see there is maybe some growth that's starting to happen there, but if the growth wasn't happening, and I was noticing a lot more of this kind of super thirstiness, because this was only watered like a week ago, and like even a month ago, this was getting watered every 2 or 3 weeks, and it was still probably a bit wet, and I'd have to recalibrate and maybe water it a bit later than expected. This is a bit too dry for comfort at the moment, which means it's getting thirstier. If I wasn't getting any growth at the top, that is a very good indication that things are preparing. We talked about this briefly before when we were looking at the roots, but if it's getting thirstier, which means it's drying out faster or it's needing more water for longer to keep it wet, that is a very, very good indication that, you know what, something's about to happen, because it's kind of prepped itself. It's done all the work that it needs to do over the winter and the run up to spring. It's got more roots in there. It wasn't fully utilizing it in the sense that let it be wet for as long as it needed, because it was a great time for the roots. It's easier, if you can imagine roots, especially, and this is a good example for something that's really fine rooted. If the root is very, very fine, and you've got very dry soil, it's harder for the root to kind of grow within that dry soil because it will find more friction. If, however, the soil media, like it would be in the winter where it stays wetter for longer, is wet and you've got a fine root, it's a lot easier for that root to keep growing, especially because you need to think about it. Not just the fine rooted ones, but even the thicker rooted ones. That growing tip on a plant, and if you've ever had like a Monstera deliciosa, and you can usually see that growth tip maybe in an aerial root, it's very sensitive, much more so than the rest of the root itself. So if it's starting to dry off a bit quicker and it's getting thirstier, it's because, you know what, I've already got some more roots in here. I'd like to maybe put some more roots down, but please, please water me because this is like a bit too dry at the moment. But one final thing I'm going to say at this stage is be still very cautious of over-watering. This is still a point where it could turn ugly relatively quickly. We're not out of the woodworks just yet. So maybe just adjust the watering schedule. As I said before, if it was every 2 weeks and now it's getting thirsty every week, shift it to every week. Don't shift it to every 5 or 3 days thinking, oh, I want to give it as much water as frequently as possible in order to kind of promote this, because especially if it's not getting any growth at the moment, this is the point where you might still be risking root rot. Spring and summer are a lot more forgiving than winter or autumn are ever going to be. But coming into some of my final thoughts, if you are seeing, you don't need to be seeing all of these subtle clues at the same time, by the way, to signify that things are getting ready to burst into life soon. Even 1 or 2 of these signals, depending on the plant, might be enough to kind of hint towards. And notice what I said throughout the video. This isn't necessarily a time where you want to be taking any immediate action. It's more the observe and just clock it. Okay, and just go, oh, okay. Maybe if it's drying out a bit too quickly, maybe just slightly more frequently, not like all the time, but slightly more frequently watering. And you should start, as the days are going to start getting even longer and all of these things, and it's going to start getting a bit warmer, you should start seeing less of the subtle hints and more the like, yes, I am now in a full growth stage. Ah! So many people have been waiting. It feels like this winter has been very long for a lot of people. Now, the one thing I will say, if you're seeing some of these subtle hints, or even none of these subtle hints, as I've just mentioned, it depends on where you are and what's happening. So I'll take, for example, the really like Arctic weather that parts of the US, for example, are having at the moment. So previous years, this might have been the time of the year where at this time you'd start seeing some of these subtle hints. However, if it's been really, really cold, or if it's been really overcast all the time, unseasonably so, you might not be seeing these subtle hints just yet, and that is completely fine as well. Some people, if it's getting super warm super quickly again, because global warming, you might be seeing these things passing a lot faster than you ever have done before. But I am very, very curious. Are you noticing any of these stages in your own plants? Where do you think you and your plants or your collection is sitting at the moment? Are you at the stage where you're looking at kind of the growth points swelling? Are you looking at the point where you're seeing more roots? Is it that the leaves are becoming a lot more turgid? Or is it potentially the fact that the leaves are starting to turn, the older leaves are starting to turn towards the light? Or is it that the pots are just getting super thirsty and super light really, really quickly? I am very curious to see. And if you are not, also share it with us down below, because I think it's a good way to understand the reality that sometimes it can be really, really different, even not that far away from each other. Like, I'll give you a specific example. I'm based in Norfolk in the UK, and that's relatively southerly. It's eastern, the eastern part of the UK, but it's relatively southern in relation to, say, for instance, not being in England, but being in Scotland, for instance, which is a lot more northern in Great Britain, basically. So up in Scotland, they might not be seeing the same kind of subtle hints, or they might be a week or 2 behind because the weather and the conditions are slightly different to maybe what I'm experiencing down here. Sometimes even that kind of a distance is enough that there's going to be a change between what you're experiencing or somebody that's not really that far away from you is also experiencing. But yes, very curious to know what stage you think you might be at this time of the year. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.